Jake Henderson had always known that his life as a space hauler would be filled with the usual, delivering cargo, dodging space pirates, and trying to avoid long bureaucratic forms. Nothing about his work seemed glamorous, but that all changed one quiet afternoon while Jake was in the middle of his usual routine, loading crates of frozen food onto his ship, the Starbound, with a couple of fellow crew members. He had just finished a long day and was looking forward to a hot meal when a strange signal beeped through his ship's communication system. He frowned and checked the screen. The message was encrypted and had a strange galactic signature. It wasn't one of the regular clients he dealt with. Probably some marketing spam, Jake muttered, but curiosity got the better of him. He opened the message. The hologram flickered to life, and a booming voice filled the room. To Jake Henderson, of Earth, you have been selected as the recipient of the last will and testament of King Senokthar II of the Krongox Dominion. Jake blinked, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. He wasn't even sure who Senokthar II was, besides the fact that he was the ruler of an alien empire on the far side of the galaxy. Was this some kind of joke? The hologram continued. Upon his death, the king has decided to bestow upon you a great honor. You are now the legal inheritor of Princess Sultraxa, the king's daughter, who is to be your responsibility as per the king's will. Should you accept, you will also gain control over several valuable planets under Krongox rule. Jake's jaw dropped. Inheritance of a princess and a responsibility. What did that even mean? Wait, what? Jake exclaimed, his mind racing. He replayed the message, trying to make sense of it, but it didn't get any clearer. This had to be some kind of mistake. He didn't know anyone in the Krongox Dominion, let alone the king. His thoughts were interrupted as a second hologram appeared, showing the face of a very official-looking alien with long purple tentacles. You may be confused, Mr. Henderson, the alien said, its voice smooth and professional. But we'd assure you, this is no mistake. King Senokthar II passed away unexpectedly, and his final wish was for you to inherit Princess Sultraxa. Jake could barely wrap his head around the information. He glanced at the screen and saw the alien smiling in a way that made Jake even more nervous. It didn't help when the alien added, should you choose to refuse, there will be severe consequences for both you and Earth. I would strongly advise you to consider your options carefully. Jake's mind was spinning. He had no idea how he got wrapped up in something this crazy. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that refusing wasn't an option. He couldn't afford to upset some alien emperor, especially not with Earth's fragile standing in the galaxy. But this inheritance felt like a bad joke. A very expensive, dangerous joke. All right, Jake muttered, rubbing his temples. So, what exactly do I have to do with this princess? The hologram smiled again, its tentacles shifting with what Jake swore was amusement. You will be responsible for the care and protection of Princess Sultraxa, the alien explained. She has been under the control of the Krongox government her entire life, and the king's death has left her with no political ties. It is customary for the heir to take up the mantle. As her new guardian, you will also need to manage her transition into the Galactic Council. Jake froze. Wait, did you just say guardian? He was suddenly struck by a horrifying thought. Was this alien asking him to marry some princess? He was nobody, just a space hauler, not some noble knight. The alien's hologram seemed to recognize Jake's panic. I assure you, Mr. Henderson, the situation is not as dire as it sounds. You are not required to marry the princess. She simply needs a place to stay and a person she can trust. Jake sighed in relief. That was one thing, at least, but the idea of being responsible for some princess, especially one from an alien race he knew nothing about, still seemed absurd. What kind of person is she? Jake asked, his voice quieter now, as he tried to get a clearer picture of the situation. The alien seemed to hesitate, as if carefully considering how to respond. Princess Siltraxit is unique. As you may know, the Krongox people are not known for their traditional appearance. Siltraxit is often considered unattractive by Krongox standards. Jake didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if he should feel sorry for the princess or if he should laugh at the absurdity of it all. How unattractive are we talking? He finally asked, genuinely curious. The alien hesitated again and then replied, "She has tentacles, bioluminescent warts, and her skin glows in patterns that some may find unsettling. Many on her homeworld find her unappealing. But she is highly intelligent, capable, and quite resourceful. It is merely her physical appearance that has caused her to be marginalized." Jake didn't know how to respond to that. He had never met an alien princess before, let alone one who was considered ugly by her people. He was starting to feel sympathy for her, who wanted to be rejected because of how they looked. The hologram continued. "Now, Mr. Henderson, you must understand that this is a serious matter. The Galactic Council is eager to see how this inheritance unfolds. And, as the princess's new guardian, you will have access to resources and influence that could prove valuable. We expect your decision to be prompt." Jake took a deep breath. This was insane. Everything about it screamed wrong. But then again, he learned a long time ago that space politics didn't make much sense. What other choice did he have? Maybe, just maybe, he could make the best of this strange situation. "All right," Jake said, his voice sounding steadier than he felt. "I'll take responsibility for her, but you better believe I'm going to need some help figuring this all out." The alien nodded, looking almost pleased. "We'll make sure you are briefed properly. And don't worry, Mr. Henderson, we'll be watching closely to ensure the process goes smoothly." The hologram faded, leaving Jake alone in the silence of his ship. He sat down, his mind still trying to catch up with the absurdity of the situation. He was suddenly a guardian to a princess he didn't know, and the whole galaxy seemed to be watching his next move. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, letting out a long sigh. This was going to be a wild ride. Jake Henderson had barely recovered from the shock of inheriting Princess Siltraxo when he found himself face to face with another problem. The whole galaxy seemed to think his life had just become the best joke in the universe, and not a haha, good for you kind of joke. No, this was the kind of joke that made the entire Galactic Council burst into hysterics. It started the very next day after Jake accepted the inheritance. As soon as he confirmed he would take responsibility for Siltraxa, a strange message came through on his ship's communication system. This one wasn't encrypted, which made it seem even more suspicious. Jake opened the message and stared at it in disbelief. The message was a live broadcast, and it came from none other than the Galactic Council itself. "Good evening, Galaxy." The host, a tall, purple-skinned alien with 3 eyes, announced in an overly dramatic voice. "Today, we have a special segment for you. Human inherits Princess Siltraxa. Is he mad or just brave?" Jake's face turned pale. He quickly realized what was happening. This wasn't just news. This was a galactic comedy show, and he was the punchline. The alien host continued, his 3 eyes widening in fake surprise. "Yes, you heard that right. A human from Earth has just inherited Princess Siltraxa, the much-ridiculed daughter of the recently passed King Xenocthar II of the Krongox Dominion." The host paused for dramatic effect before adding, "We're all wondering, who would willingly choose to be responsible for that?" Suddenly, the screen flashed to a clip of Princess Siltraxa, captured during her most famous public appearances. She was, as the Krongox people had so kindly pointed out, not exactly easy on the eyes. With her pale, bioluminescent skin, which glowed in bright neon hues, and her tentacles, which waved like the limbs of a confused jellyfish, Siltraxa certainly wasn't the image of a classic royal beauty. On top of that, she had bright purple warts on her forehead that looked more like an alien version of a bad rash than anything royal. And yet, Jake couldn't help but notice, She carried herself with an air of quiet dignity. The broadcast zoomed in on Siltrax's glowing, slightly off-putting appearance, and then cut back to the host, who was practically doubling over with laughter. Can you imagine? The host chuckled. The poor human. A lifetime of, well, that. Jake's stomach sank. This wasn't going to be easy. Every alien species across the galaxy seemed to find his situation absolutely hilarious. The Krongoks had always mocked their own princess because of her appearance, but now they were roasting him for agreeing to care for her. The worst part was, Jake could do nothing but watch it unfold on screen. As the broadcast went on, other members of the Galactic Council took turns weighing in on the situation. Some spoke in mock concern, others with outright amusement, but the tone was always the same. They were all laughing at Jake. A blue-skinned alien from the Urath species leaned into the camera, flashing a set of razor-sharp teeth. Well, isn't this a fun surprise? A human inheriting a Krongok's princess. Maybe Earthlings are more desperate than we thought. It was clear that this alien's idea of humor was making fun of others' discomfort. Another alien, a thin and snake-like creature from the Vexeri race, hissed with laughter. Imagine being stuck with her on a long diplomatic mission. Can you picture the royal dinners? She might start glowing and blind you halfway through the meal. Poor human. It was obvious that the Vexeri's sense of humor was based on making the most awkward situation even worse. Jake couldn't believe it. Not only was the entire galaxy mocking him, but they were also making it sound like he had been cursed, not honored. He ran a hand through his hair and muttered to himself, "This can't be real. I'm in the middle of a galactic roast." The commentary grew worse by the minute. A representative from the Flaxi, a species known for their giant, feathered bodies and bird-like voices, added, "The Krongoks are known for their sense of humor, but this is something else. I mean, surely the human has some self-preservation instincts, right? This is a life sentence." The broadcast turned into a full-fledged spectacle, with the entire Galactic Council taking turns mocking Jake. Some of the humor was cruel, but there was a sense of showmanship to it, as if they were all in on some big joke. Even Siltraxa, who was sitting in the background during part of the broadcast, became the subject of their jokes. The camera panned to her, showing her sitting gracefully, her tentacles folded, and her face showing no sign of the embarrassment that the galaxy seemed to expect. Instead of shrinking away or looking sad, Siltraxa sat with quiet pride. Despite everything, she didn't seem to care about the ridicule. Jake started to feel a strange sense of respect for her. Then the show brought in a representative from Earth, and Jake's face turned even redder. He had no idea who this person was, but they clearly had no idea how to help the situation. "Humans," the Earth representative said in an awkward voice, "we're proud of Jake. He's showing real courage. I mean, who else would take on such an important responsibility?" The camera switched back to the alien host, who gave a dramatic sigh. Courage, or sheer desperation. What a strange species. The host winked at the camera, clearly enjoying the discomfort the whole situation was causing. Jake, now fuming, shut off the broadcast with an annoyed grunt. "I don't need this. I can't believe they're making such a big deal out of this. I'm just trying to help out." He paced around the small room in frustration, trying to calm his racing thoughts. Every species in the galaxy seemed to think of him as the universe's newest punchline. It felt like he had stepped into a comedy show that he couldn't get out of. As if things couldn't get worse, the next day brought more bad news. News outlets across the galaxy were flooding their channels with memes, cartoons, and snide comments about Jake and Princess Siltraxa. Some even made animated shorts about the terrible fate of the human who had to live with the Krongok's princess. One meme showed Jake holding a bouquet of glowing flowers with the caption, "When you inherit the princess, but she's not what you expected." Jake didn't even want to check his comms anymore. He could already guess what was coming. More memes, more laughs, more alien ridicule. But then, something unexpected happened. He received another message. This one was from Siltraxa herself. It was a short, private transmission with no fanfare. When Jake opened it, he saw her face for the first time without the public stage or alien laughter surrounding her. Her bioluminescent skin glowed softly, and her eyes, though large and slightly unsettling to some, were kind. "Jake," she began, "I know what's going on out there. The galaxy is laughing, and I don't blame them. But I'm not angry with you. I didn't ask for this, and neither did you. I'm grateful you've agreed to take me under your care." Jake blinked in surprise. The calmness in her voice caught him off guard. "You're not mad about all the jokes?" he asked, his voice a little hoarse. She smiled, her tentacles shifting gently. "Why should I be? It's nothing I haven't heard before. I've lived with their laughter all my life. It doesn't bother me. But I wanted you to know, I'm not just some ugly princess. I'm capable. And I promise you, Jake, you're not in this alone." Jake stared at the screen for a moment, unsure how to respond. He had expected Siltraxa to be angry, to lash out, but instead she was calm, collected, and strangely understanding. It dawned on him then, maybe he wasn't the only one who had been unfairly judged. Maybe this situation wasn't as hopeless as it seemed. Maybe the galaxy's laughter would soon turn into something else entirely. And just maybe, Jake wasn't the punchline after all. Jake Henderson spent the next few days trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. The entire galaxy had laughed at him, poked fun at him, and made him the butt of countless jokes. He was still dealing with the fallout from all the mockery, but something had changed after his conversation with Princess Siltraxa. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter about the galaxy's jokes. Instead, she had spoken calmly, as if she'd learned to shrug off the ridicule long ago. But Jake wasn't sure what he was supposed to do now. He had inherited the princess. But what exactly did that mean? The holographic message from the Galactic Council had said he was now responsible for Siltraxa, and that he'd need to care for her. But how was he supposed to do that? He wasn't a royal advisor, and he certainly wasn't trained in intergalactic politics. He was just a guy from Earth who wanted to do his job and live a simple life. And then there was the matter of the inheritance itself. The Galactic Council had been very clear. Taking care of Siltraxa meant more than just looking after a princess. It meant he had access to a powerful position in galactic politics, one that could change the course of human history. Jake didn't fully understand it yet, but he could feel the weight of it pressing on him. He couldn't avoid the fact that the Krongok's dominion, where Siltraxa came from, was an empire of immense power. The Krongoks were feared and respected across the galaxy. They had resources, technology, and military strength. To be tied to their princess, even in this awkward and unusual way, meant that Jake and Earth might have just gained access to something huge. But how? After a few days of silence, Jake decided it was time to face Siltraxa. She hadn't made any demands, but he felt he had to meet with her to figure out what they were going to do next. So he arranged a video call with her on his ship's communication system. When the screen blinked on, Jake was surprised to see that Siltraxa didn't appear the way he had imagined. She was sitting calmly in what appeared to be a beautiful chamber, surrounded by soft, glowing lights that seemed to match the colors of her skin. Her tentacles, usually a point of mockery, curled gently at her sides, and she looked far more dignified than any princess Jake had seen in movies. Her bioluminescent skin softly pulsed, like the rhythm of a heartbeat, and her large, glowing eyes stared at Jake with a level of understanding he hadn't expected. "Jake," Siltraxa greeted, her voice soft yet confident. "I'm glad we're finally able to speak directly." Jake had always imagined an awkward conversation, maybe even one filled with complaints or demands. But her voice didn't carry any of the bitterness he had expected. She sounded genuinely calm, almost like she had accepted everything already, even the ridiculousness of their situation. I don't know what I'm doing, Siltraxa," Jake admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't have any experience with this kind of thing. I don't know what it means to be responsible for a princess, let alone an empire. Siltraxa smiled, her glowing skin shifting with the softest hues of purple and blue. You're not the only one who's confused. The inheritance was never about making you a king or ruler. It's about opportunity. Jake frowned. Opportunity? What do you mean? The Krongok's dominion is powerful, Jake. But it is also fragile. My father's death has created a vacuum. There are factions within the Dominion that will fight for power. If you become my guardian, you will be able to use your position to influence not only the Krongoks, but the entire galaxy. Siltraxa paused for a moment, as if thinking about the weight of her words. You are now in a position of power, whether you realize it or not. Jake stared at her, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to being important, let alone being a part of something this huge. But I'm just a guy from Earth, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. I didn't sign up for this. I was just trying to get by, you know. Siltraxa nodded slowly, as if she had expected this reaction. I understand. I never wanted this position either. But now that we're here, we can't ignore what's happening around us. Earth is a growing power, Jake. The Krongoks see you as a bridge between their empire and your world. The Galactic Council sees you as an opportunity to shape the future of the galaxy. Jake leaned back in his chair, trying to process everything she was saying. It was a lot to take in, but Siltraxa's words were starting to sink in. She wasn't asking him to be a traditional ruler or king. She was offering him something bigger: influence, control, and the chance to play a key role in galactic politics. All he had to do was help her navigate this strange, new reality. What do you need from me, then? Jake asked, feeling the pressure rise. What can I do to make this work? Siltraxa's expression grew more serious. I need you to understand one thing, Jake. The Galactic Council is watching us closely. They mock us now, but their attitude could change if they realize we can work together. The Krongok's Dominion's military power is unmatched, but my father's death has thrown everything into chaos. If we can stabilize the Krongoks, we can stabilize Earth's position in the galaxy. If we can get the Council on our side, then we can use that influence to protect both our worlds. Jake's mind raced as he absorbed her words. It wasn't just about him and Siltraxa anymore. This was about Earth's future, about making sure humanity had a place at the table, about surviving in a galaxy filled with powerful alien species that could easily crush Earth if they decided to. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. But there was one problem. The Galactic Council was no friend to Earth, and Jake had no idea how to play their political games. He was just a space hauler. He didn't know the first thing about negotiations, alliances, or intergalactic diplomacy. What about the Council? Jake asked. How are we supposed to get them on our side when they've been laughing at us this whole time? Siltrax's eyes sparkled with quiet determination. The Council may laugh, but they are not invincible. They may hold power, but they are divided. Many of the species in the Council are constantly fighting for influence. Earth is an unknown player to them, but they are curious. They are starting to realize that you and I together can bring stability. Jake blinked. So you want me to convince them? Not just convince them. We need to show them that we are not what they think. We are not a joke. I can play the game on my own, Jake, but you have the power to make Earth's voice heard. Your people will have to support us. Together, we can become a force they can't ignore. Jake took a deep breath. It was a lot to ask, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't have a choice. He had already stepped into a role far bigger than himself, and now there was no turning back. Earth's future, Siltrax's future, and even his own future were all tied together in this strange, dangerous web of politics and power. Okay, Jake said, his voice firm. Let's do it. Let's show the galaxy what we're really capable of. Siltrax's glowing eyes softened with approval. I knew you'd understand, Jake. Together, we can change everything. And with that, they began to make their plans. They would have to face the Galactic Council, survive their ridicule, and prove that humanity had a place in the stars. It was a long shot, but Jake had never backed down from a challenge before. And this time, he wasn't going to back down either. Not when so much was at stake. Jake Henderson wasn't sure what had changed, but after his conversation with Princess Stiltraxa, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was now much more complicated. What had initially seemed like a ridiculous situation, being mocked by the entire galaxy for inheriting the ugliest princess in the galaxy, was beginning to take on a much darker tone. It wasn't just about appearances anymore. It wasn't even about the endless jokes and memes that had flooded the galactic media. It was about something much deeper, something far more dangerous than the mocking laughter. Stiltraxa had told him that her father's death had caused a power vacuum in the Krongok's dominion, and she had hinted that many factions were vying for control. Jake didn't know much about galactic politics, but he knew enough to understand that a power vacuum wasn't just a minor issue. It was a recipe for chaos. And the Krongok's dominion wasn't some small, insignificant empire. It was massive, with a military force that could wipe out entire planets if it wanted to. Whoever controlled the dominion controlled a huge part of the galaxy. This was not the peaceful, simple life that Jake had imagined when he first agreed to take care of Stiltraxa. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he wasn't just responsible for her. He was responsible for the stability of an entire empire, and possibly the fate of Earth itself. Over the next few days, Jake found himself buried in a mountain of paperwork and political briefings. He wasn't used to reading through endless documents filled with alien names, treaties, and agreements that made his head spin. But Stiltraxa had been right. Earth's future was now tied to the Krongok's dominion, and Jake was expected to play a role in it. One morning, as Jake sat in his small cabin aboard his ship, reading through the latest diplomatic report, Stiltraxa joined him for their scheduled meeting. He glanced up from the papers and saw her standing in the doorway, her glowing skin softly pulsing with an almost ethereal light. Her tentacles shifted slightly, giving her an air of quiet confidence, but there was something in her eyes that Jake couldn't quite place, an unease, perhaps. "You're still reading?" she asked, her voice gentle but carrying an edge of concern. "You know, you don't have to do this all alone." Jake sighed and rubbed his eyes. "It's just so much. I barely understand half of this stuff, and every time I think I've made progress, something else comes up." Stiltraxa stepped forward and sat down across from him. Her calm demeanor contrasted with the frustration he felt. "This isn't just about you, Jake," she said softly. "This is about the future of the Krongok's dominion and the role Earth will play in the galaxy." "I know," Jake replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "But there's more to this, isn't there? You keep saying there are factions fighting for power. What does that mean for us?" Stiltraxa's eyes darkened slightly. "It means we are in more danger than you realize. The death of my father was not just the loss of a ruler. It was the beginning of a war for control. The Krongok's dominion is made up of many powerful factions, each with their own goals. Some want to maintain the status quo, while others seek to expand our empire even further. The problem is, none of them are willing to work with each other. They are all scrambling to fill the power vacuum my father left behind." Jake stared at her, trying to grasp the magnitude of what she was saying. "So it's not just about keeping things peaceful?" he asked. "You're telling me that the Krongoks could tear each other apart over this?" Stiltraxa nodded solemnly. "Exactly. The Krongoks are proud, powerful, and deeply divided. Each faction has its own agenda, and they will do whatever it takes to gain control. Some will use diplomacy and alliances. Others will use force. My father's death was a spark, Jake, and the flames are already spreading." Jake leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. He had signed up to take care of a princess, but now he was finding himself in the middle of a galactic power struggle. The future of Earth was tied to whatever happened in the Krongok's dominion. If the factions couldn't find a way to work together, the entire galaxy could be thrown into chaos, and Earth might be caught in the middle. I had no idea it was this bad, Jake muttered, more to himself than to Xiltraxa. I thought we could just survive, you know. But now, it feels like we're stuck in the middle of something much bigger than us. You're right, Xiltraxa said softly. This isn't just about us. It's about the entire galaxy, and it's about you. Jake frowned, confused. What do you mean? Xiltraxa's gaze sharpened. I didn't tell you everything before. I didn't want to burden you, but you need to understand the truth. There is a dark secret about my family's rule. My father wasn't just a ruler. He was a tyrant. Jake's heart skipped a beat. A tyrant. I thought the Krongoks were just, well, a little eccentric. I didn't think they were a dictatorship. They weren't, at least not in the traditional sense, Xiltraxa explained, her voice carrying a mix of sadness and anger. But my father's rule was built on fear. He used the military to control the factions, and anyone who opposed him was dealt with swiftly and ruthlessly. The Krongoks had no room for dissent. My father kept the peace through intimidation, not through diplomacy or respect. And now, after his death, the factions are all scrambling for control, each one trying to claim the power my father once held. Jake sat silently, processing her words. The princess he had inherited wasn't just the victim of a cruel fate. She was the daughter of a ruler who had terrorized his people. The truth about the Krongoks' dominion was ugly, and it was something Jake wasn't sure he could handle. But if that's the case, Jake said carefully, why didn't you do something sooner? Why didn't you try to stop him? Xiltraxa's face grew tense, and for the first time, Jake saw something like vulnerability in her eyes. I tried. I spent years trying to change things from within. But it's hard to fight against a system that's been in place for centuries. My father didn't see me as his daughter. He saw me as an heir to be used as a pawn. He didn't trust me. And in the end, he made sure I would inherit his power in name only, not in substance. But now, her voice trailed off, and she sighed deeply. Now it's my responsibility to fix things, to stop the factions from tearing each other apart and bringing chaos to the galaxy. Jake took a deep breath. The truth was worse than he could have imagined. He had inherited not just a princess, but a broken system, a galaxy on the brink of war. His role in this was no longer about caring for someone who was mocked and ridiculed. It was about navigating the ugliest parts of galactic politics. We can't do this alone, Jake said, his voice steady. We need to find a way to unite the factions, to show them that there's another way forward. We need to stop the bloodshed before it's too late. Xiltraxa nodded, her face filled with determination. You're right, but it won't be easy. The factions won't listen to me. They think I'm weak. They think I'm just the ugly princess who can't do anything. But we have something they don't, an outsider's perspective. You can show them that there's more to this than just fighting for control. We have a chance to bring something new to the table, something they haven't considered. Jake stood up, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He didn't know if he was ready for this, but there was no turning back now. The future of the galaxy and the future of Earth rested on their shoulders. We'll do it, Jake said, his voice firm. We'll make them listen. And with that, the two of them set off to face the ugly truth head-on, knowing that the battle ahead would be far more difficult than either of them could imagine. But they were determined to fight for a future where peace, not power, would rule the galaxy. The weight of the galaxy was heavy on Jake Henderson's shoulders. He had never imagined his life would take such an unexpected turn. Just a few weeks ago, he was an ordinary man living an ordinary life on Earth. Now, he was the caretaker of a princess, Xiltraxa, a creature of light and power who had inherited an empire in chaos. Jake had learned the hard way that his job wasn't as simple as keeping her safe. No, this was about saving an entire galaxy from the brink of war. It had been several days since Xiltraxa had revealed the truth about her father's tyranny and the impending struggle for control of the Krongoks' dominion. They had begun to meet with various factions, trying to convince them to work together and form some kind of agreement, but the results had been less than promising. Every meeting had ended in arguments, threats, and open hostility. The factions of the Krongoks were entrenched in their own power struggles, and no one seemed interested in compromising. To them, Siltraxa was nothing more than a symbol of weakness, a figurehead with no real power. But Siltraxa wasn't as helpless as they thought. She had a quiet strength, something Jake hadn't fully understood until now. It wasn't just her bioluminescent skin that made her unique. It was her determination to change the Krongok's dominion. She wasn't going to let her father's legacy of fear and division dictate her future. One night, as they sat alone in the quiet of her chambers aboard the ship, Jake found himself staring at Siltraxa. She was reading through a new set of reports, her glowing skin flickering softly in the dim light. There was something mesmerizing about her, something more than just her physical appearance. Her eyes, large and luminous, held a depth of emotion and intelligence that Jake couldn't ignore. He had spent so much time focusing on the political mess they were in that he hadn't taken a moment to truly understand Siltraxa as a person. She looked up from her datapad and caught his gaze. A faint smile crossed her lips, but it was one of understanding, not mockery. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying an undercurrent of strength. Jake hesitated. There was so much going through his mind, but he couldn't put it all into words. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "This whole thing is crazy. The more I try to fix it, the more I feel like we're just spinning our wheels." Siltraxa set her datapad down and walked over to where Jake was sitting. She sat beside him, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her body. It was strange how something so alien could still feel so human. Her bioluminescent glow had a calming effect, like a soft light in the dark. "You're doing more than you think," she said gently. "You're helping me stay grounded, Jake. When you're around, it feels like I'm not alone in all this." Jake swallowed, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to people relying on him, especially not someone as powerful and important as Siltraxa. But her words stirred something deep inside him, a feeling he hadn't expected. Was it just the pressure of the situation, or was something else at play? "I don't know if I can do this," Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, this is way bigger than me. I'm just a regular guy from Earth. I'm not cut out for this kind of thing." Siltraxa's eyes softened. "Jake, you are cut out for this. You've proven that already. You've been there when I needed you most, when everything seemed impossible. You've given me hope, even when I couldn't find it myself." Jake felt a pang in his chest. Her words meant more to him than he could say, and he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong about himself. He wasn't just a bystander in this galaxy-wide conflict. He was part of it, and that meant he had a role to play. There was a long silence between them as Jake processed her words. It felt as though the distance between them had closed, as if they were no longer just a princess and her reluctant protector, but two people caught in the same struggle, facing the same unknown future. As he looked into her eyes, Jake found himself drawn to her more than ever before. He hadn't expected this feeling. It was confusing, and he wasn't sure what it meant. But as the silence stretched on, he felt something shift inside him. "I don't want to fail you," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to let you down." Siltraxa reached out and touched his arm gently. "You haven't let me down, Jake. Not once. And you never will." Before Jake could respond, the alarm on the ship suddenly blared, cutting through the quiet room. Siltraxa quickly stood up, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the warning system. "What is it?" Jake asked, jumping to his feet. "There's a message from the Krongok's High Command," Siltraxa said, her voice tight. "They want to meet." Jake's stomach twisted. High Command? That was bad news. The Krongok's military wasn't known for its diplomacy, and a meeting with them could only mean one thing, an ultimatum. "We have to go," Siltraxa said, her tone firm. Jake followed her out of the room, his mind racing. As they arrived in the command center, he could see the urgency in Siltraxa's face. She was doing her best to keep calm, but Jake could sense the pressure mounting on her. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern for her. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the stern faces of the Krongok's high command. They were large, intimidating figures, their bodies encased in battle armor. Their glowing eyes stared at Siltraxa with cold intensity. "Princess Siltraxa," one of the commanders growled, "we have waited long enough. The factions are tearing apart the Dominion. Your father is dead, and you are incapable of holding power. If you continue to stand in our way, we will take control by force. Do not test us." Jake felt his heart race as he listened to the commander's words. This was the moment Siltraxa had feared, the moment when the military would make its move. But Siltraxa stood tall, her glowing skin shifting in hues of blue and purple, a sign of her calm yet resolute demeanor. "You misunderstand," she said, her voice steady. "I am not here to fight for power. I am here to unite the Dominion. But if you cannot see reason, if you cannot lay down your weapons and work together, then I will do what I must to protect my people." The commander's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Siltraxa had called their bluff. Jake stood by her side, unsure of what to do next. He wasn't a diplomat, and he certainly wasn't a soldier. But one thing he knew for sure, this wasn't just about power. This was about survival. And if he and Siltraxa were going to make it out of this alive, they would need to do it together. As the transmission ended, the room fell into an uneasy silence. Siltraxa turned to Jake, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We're not out of danger yet, but we've taken the first step. The factions won't be able to ignore us forever." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of the situation press even heavier on him. He wasn't just standing beside Siltraxa as a protector anymore. He was standing with her as an equal, facing the same battles, the same risks. And somewhere in the midst of all this chaos, Jake realized something else. He had developed feelings for Siltraxa, feelings that went beyond mere duty. In the face of war and uncertainty, they had found something unexpected, something beautiful, something he never thought he'd find in a galaxy so filled with darkness. "I won't let you face this alone," Jake said quietly, looking into her eyes. And for the first time, Siltraxa smiled, a smile that wasn't just for show, but one that held real warmth. "Thank you, Jake. Together, we can do this." As the lights of the command center dimmed and the stars beyond the ship's windows twinkled like distant promises, Jake and Siltraxa knew the road ahead would be treacherous. But they would face it side by side, bound not just by duty, but by something far stronger. The tension in the air was palpable. Jake Henderson stood in the control room of the ship, staring out at the starry expanse of space. He wasn't just gazing at the vast, uncharted reaches of the galaxy anymore. He was looking at the future of the Krongok's dominion, and the future of Earth. The fate of an entire galaxy rested on the choices that he, Siltraxa, and a handful of allies would make in the next few days. The Krongok's military's ultimatum had shaken him, but it had also lit a fire within him. Siltraxa was right. They couldn't sit back and let the factions tear the galaxy apart. The High Command might have been powerful, but Jake wasn't going to let them intimidate him. He had Earth to protect, and he had something even more important now, a cause to fight for. As he turned from the window, Jake found Siltraxa standing just a few feet away, her glowing skin softly illuminating the dim room. Her luminous eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. They both knew what needed to be done. It was time for action. "We need to make a statement," Jake said, his voice firm. "Something big, something that will make every faction in the galaxy sit up and take notice. We need to show them we're not backing down." Siltraxa tilted her head slightly, her bioluminescent tentacles flicking as she thought. "You mean more than just talk?" "You're right. It's time for a demonstration. Jake nodded. Exactly. We've tried to negotiate, to reason with them, but now it's time to show them that Earth isn't just some distant planet they can ignore. We're part of this galaxy now, and we're not going to be treated like second-class citizens. Siltrax's eyes sparkled with an emotion that Jake could only describe as fire. She had always been a princess, but now he saw her as a leader, someone who wasn't just going to wait for the galaxy to choose her fate. She was going to take control of it. I think I have an idea, she said, her voice growing more determined. Let's make sure they know just how far we're willing to go. The following hours were filled with planning, coordination, and a lot of uncertainty. But Siltrax's resolve was unshakable. She had always known that in order to unite the Krongox factions, she needed to demonstrate not just her power, but the power of the galaxy itself. And Jake, for the first time since he'd gotten involved in all this, was starting to feel like he could truly help. The gathering storm. It wasn't long before their plan was set into motion. Jake and Siltraxa called for a summit, a meeting with the leaders of every major faction in the Krongox Dominion. The High Command would be there, as well as representatives from the military, the political factions, and even some powerful corporate leaders. If they were going to have any chance at uniting the galaxy, they needed to do it now. The summit would take place on the neutral planet of Vexorus, a world that had long been a haven for diplomacy and trade. Vexorus had once been a peaceful planet, but with the growing instability in the Krongox Dominion, it had become a symbol of both hope and fear. For Siltraxa, it was the perfect location for their final push. But the plan they had was far from peaceful. As the ship neared Vexorus, Jake found himself pacing back and forth in his quarters, trying to shake the nerves that had settled in his stomach. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting anymore. It was a gamble, a high-stakes game that could either bring peace to the galaxy or plunge it into a war that would last for centuries. He couldn't afford to fail. Not when so many lives were at stake, and definitely not when Earth's future hung in the balance. Siltraxa walked into his quarters just as he was about to sit down, her eyes scanning his face as if she could read his thoughts. "You're nervous," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. Jake let out a frustrated sigh. "You could say that. This is bigger than anything I've ever done. One wrong move, and it could all fall apart." "Then don't make a wrong move," Siltraxa said, her voice playful but serious. "You've got this, Jake. We've got this." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that Jake hadn't realized he needed to hear. He had come so far from the unsure, reluctant protector who had first stepped into her world. Now he was part of something much bigger. He was part of a team. And together, they were going to show the galaxy just what they were capable of. The summit. Galactic mic drop. The summit on Vexorus was set to begin in just a few hours. Jake and Siltraxa arrived early, preparing for the diplomatic chaos that was about to unfold. The atmosphere on the planet was thick with tension. Everyone knew this would be a turning point. The factions were divided, angry, and distrustful. But if Siltraxa could pull this off, if they could convince the leaders to put aside their differences and come to a new agreement, they might just save the galaxy from descending into a bloody civil war. Jake stood beside Siltraxa as they entered the grand hall where the summit would take place. The room was filled with representatives from every corner of the Krongox Dominion, each of them seated at long, imposing tables, their eyes filled with suspicion. The High Command was already there, their armored figures looming over the rest of the assembly. Siltraxa took her seat at the head of the table, her eyes scanning the room. Jake sat beside her, trying his best to look calm, though his heart was racing. This was it. This was the moment when everything would either come together or fall apart. The room fell silent as the representatives waited for Siltraxa to speak. The tension was so thick that you could almost feel it in the air. For a moment, Siltraxa simply looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each leader. Then she stood, her bioluminescence flickering like the dawn of a new day. "You've all come here today Because you know something needs to change, she began, her voice steady but commanding. The Krongok's dominion is on the brink of war. We've spent years tearing each other apart, fighting for control. And where has it gotten us? A galaxy divided, weak, and vulnerable. It's time for that to end. The room was still. No one dared interrupt. Siltraxa continued, her voice growing stronger with every word. I've heard your complaints. I've listened to your threats. But what I haven't heard is a single solution to the problem. None of you have come here today with a plan to end this conflict. So, let me be clear. I am the plan. Jake couldn't help but admire her confidence. She was no longer the unsure princess he had met months ago. She was a queen, standing tall and demanding respect. She paused, letting her words sink in. The room shifted uncomfortably, but Siltraxa stood her ground. I've called you here for one reason, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. To show you that the Krongok's dominion is stronger together than it could ever be apart. We can no longer afford to play petty political games. Our galaxy is on the line. And if you want peace, you'll have to accept the reality that peace is not a choice. It is a necessity. At that moment, a holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room. The lights dimmed, and the image of a massive fleet of warships appeared, ships from every faction of the Dominion, all mobilized and ready for battle. This, Siltraxa said coldly, is the power we could unleash. This is what war looks like. The room gasped. No one had expected her to go this far. But this, she continued, is not the future I want. And this is not the future Earth wants. So if you think you can scare us, or threaten us, or manipulate us into submission, think again. We're done with fear. She turned to Jake, her voice now steady and full of resolve. This is where we stand, together. The Krongoks are no longer in charge. The galaxy is no longer in the hands of those who have built their empires on violence and division. Today we rise above. Today we make history. With that, the room fell into a heavy silence. Siltraxa had dropped the mic. The power had shifted. And now it was up to the factions to decide whether they would rise to the occasion or fall into chaos. Jake looked around the room. The leaders of the factions were silent, some of them shifting uncomfortably, others deep in thought. This was the moment that would define the future of the galaxy. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could do this.